In the annals of professional sport, there are athletes who transcend mere skill. They don't just win, they dominate. They don't just compete, they instill dread. They weaponize the very essence of their presence. Consider the pitcher in baseball, standing just 60 feet 6 inches away, hurling a small, hard object at speeds exceeding 100 miles per hour. It's a dangerous game, but for a select few, that danger wasn't just a byproduct of the sport. It was a conscious, strategic, and often terrifying choice. Today, we're not just looking for the hardest throwers or the winningest arms. We're diving into the minds, the reputations, and the sheer audacity of those who mastered the art of intimidation, who truly owned the mound, not just with their arm, but with their will. Who was the most intimidating pitcher in baseball history? And what does that tell us about the human element at the heart of the game? Let's begin with the obvious. Sometimes, intimidation is simply an unavoidable byproduct of sheer, pure physical prowess. Take Randy Johnson, the big unit, standing 6'10" with a pitching arm that unleashed heat and a slider that broke bats and spirits. Facing Johnson wasn't just about trying to hit the ball, it was about surviving the at-bat. His presence alone was a weapon. The sound of his fastball seemed to bend the air. This wasn't malice necessarily, but a physical dominance so profound it induced fear. To truly understand why Randy Johnson was a nightmare for left-handed hitters, you have to look at the geometry. Because of his 6'10" frame and his sidearm delivery, the ball didn't look like it was coming from the mound. To a lefty, it looked like it was coming from behind their own ear. It's what players called the fear factor. In the 1993 All-Star Game, he famously threw a ball over Larry Walker's head. Walker, an MVP caliber hitter, was so rattled that he turned his batting helmet around and batted right-handed just to stay as far away from the ball as possible. It was a joke, yes, but it was rooted in a very real survival instinct. When Johnson was on the mound, the game of baseball became a game of dodgeball at 100 miles per hour. Then there was Bob Gibson, a different era, a different kind of fear. Gibson wasn't just tall, he was an athlete, a competitor forged in an era of hardball. His intimidation came from an unyielding refusal to yield, a menacing stare, and a fastball that dared you to dig in your cleats. Most pitchers focus on the catcher's mitt. Bob Gibson focused on the batter's soul. He famously refused to fraternize with opponents, not just during the game, but ever. He wouldn't even say hello to players on other teams. He believed that any sign of friendliness was a sign of weakness. There's a story of a teammate telling Gibson that an opponent had spoken highly of him. Gibson's response: he hit that player with a pitch the very next time he saw him. Why? Because he didn't want the hitter to feel comfortable. He wanted the batter's box to feel like a lonely, dangerous place. Gibson often said, "I didn't try to hurt anybody, I just didn't want anybody to think I wouldn't." That subtle distinction is key. It wasn't about intentionally hitting, it was about the threat, the absolute certainty that he could and would if provoked. It created an environment where batters simply couldn't relax. To understand Gibson's fear, you have to understand the Gibson rule. After his 1968 season, where he posted a 1.12 ERA, a number so low it sounds like a typo, the MLB actually lowered the height of the pitching mound by 5 inches. Think about that. He was so dominant, so terrifyingly efficient, that the league had to physically alter the landscape of the game just to give hitters a fighting chance. When he stood on that original 15-inch mound, he looked like a titan descending from a mountain. Every pitch wasn't just a strike, it was a personal insult to the man holding the bat. These men didn't need theatrics. Their intimidation was intrinsic, a combination of God-given talent and an uncompromising will. But what about those who cultivated the fear? In the 1960s, a new brand of intimidation began to emerge, often justified by the unspoken rules of the game. Don Drysdale was a pioneer in this regard, a Hall of Famer with a devastating curveball and a reputation for using the inside of the plate, sometimes a little too much. Drysdale wasn't just pitching, he was sending messages. If you homered off his teammate, you might get a fastball aimed at your ribs in your next at-bat. Don Drysdale didn't just hit batters, he had a mathematical approach to retaliation. There was a legendary ratio attributed to him. If you hit one of his Dodgers teammates, he would hit 2 of yours. It wasn't about anger, it was about establishing a cost of doing business. Think about the psychological weight that puts on an opposing pitcher. Before you even think about throwing inside to a Dodger, you have to look at your own teammates and decide who you're willing to sacrifice. sacrifice. Drysdale once said, "The pitcher has to find out if the batter is afraid, and if he is, he has to use that." Drysdale was the ultimate chess player, except his chess pieces were 95-mile-per-hour fastballs aimed at the ribs. He even reportedly hit his own manager with a pitch in a spring training game, an anecdote that became part of his fearsome lore. It was an era where protecting your teammates often meant retaliating with a fastball. Jump forward to the late 80s, early 90s, and you find a different kind of enforcer, Rob Dibble, part of the infamous Nasty Boys bullpen. Dibble's intimidation wasn't just about the occasional plunking, it was about constant aggressive confrontation. Dibble wasn't subtle. He'd throw near a batter's head for seemingly minor infractions, taking too long in the box, asking for time. His emotional outbursts were legendary. This was intimidation as pure psychological warfare, designed to rattle a batter's confidence and make them question every move. There's a specific moment that perfectly encapsulates the Dibble era. In 1991, during a game against the Cubs, Doug Descenzo laid down a successful squeeze bunt against him. Most pitchers would be annoyed at the play. Dibble, he was insulted. Instead of throwing the ball to first base for the out, he fired it directly at Descenzo's back as he ran to first. This is where intimidation crosses the line into something unpredictable. When a pitcher is willing to ignore the guaranteed out just to inflict physical pain, the game changes. Batters weren't just thinking about the strike zone anymore, they were wondering if the man on the mound was about to snap. For those who enjoys the bad boy era of sports, Dibble was the living embodiment of a ticking time bomb. Both Drysdale and Dibble understood that fear wasn't always about the fastest pitch. Sometimes it was about the uncertainty of what might happen next. Then there are those whose intimidation came from an unsettling unpredictability, a perceived flirtation with madness on the mound. Al Hrabosky, the Mad Hungarian, was a showman whose pre-pitch ritual was as famous as his fastball. Early in his career, Hrabosky was struggling. He had a 6.00 ERA and was on the verge of being out of the league. He realized that if he couldn't beat hitters with just his arm, he had to beat them with their own nerves. He grew out a menacing Fu Manchu mustache, which his team actually tried to ban, and developed the routine. It was a masterclass in tension. He would turn his back to the batter, walk towards second base, and stare at the center field fence. He was literally psyching himself up into a rage. Then he'd slam the ball into his glove, turn around, and stomp back to the rubber with a glare that suggested he was barely holding on to his sanity. It was an act, yes, but an incredibly effective one. This wasn't just theater, it was an interruption of the batter's rhythm. In the 1970s, players like Bill Madlock found it so infuriating they'd refuse to stay in the box. This led to stare-down standoffs that lasted minutes. Hrabosky understood a fundamental truth about human nature. If you can make a man angry or confused, he's already lost his focus. He once said, "How am I going to convince them I'm a dangerous hitman if I look like a golf pro?" Hrabosky represents a lost art, the era of the character who used psychological warfare to level the playing field. He didn't just pitch to the catcher, he pitched against the batter's peace of mind. Batters were left wondering what was going on inside his head, and it's that uncertainty that made Hrabosky truly terrifying. And then Pedro Martinez, a man of smaller stature but with the heart of a lion and an arsenal of pitches that made him arguably the most dominant pitcher of his era. Pedro's intimidation wasn't physical in the same way Johnson's was, nor was it always overtly aggressive like Drysdale. It was born from sheer, unshakable confidence and an almost surgical precision that bordered on taunting. He didn't need to throw 100 miles per hour every time. His fastball seemed faster because his changeup was so deceptive. Pedro's intimidation was intellectual. He'd stare you down, work the inner half, and make you believe he could put the ball wherever he wanted, including your body, if you challenged him. His infamous quote, "Wake up, you have a brain," after a batter complained about an inside pitch, perfectly encapsulated his mental approach. Let's freeze frame on one of the most controversial moments in sports history, the 2003 ALCS. The rivalry between the Red Sox and the Yankees was at a boiling point. Pedro hits Karim Garcia. Words are exchanged. Suddenly, 72-year-old Yankees coach Don Zimmer charges Pedro. What does Pedro do? He doesn't back away. He grabs the elderly man by the head and shoves him to the turf. To the world, it looked cruel. To Pedro, it was simple. Don't ever think your age or your status protects you from my territory. This wasn't just a brawl. It was a statement that on Pedro's mound, there are no bystanders, batters, only targets. These pitchers played mind games. They understood that fear could be a product of the unexpected, the unsettling, or the utterly self-assured. But if we must crown one undisputed king of intimidation, a figure who combined physical prowess, relentless aggression, and an unwavering mental fortitude, the conversation invariably leads to Nolan Ryan. The Ryan Express pitched for 4 decades, an anomaly of longevity and power. He threw more no-hitters than anyone in history, struck out more batters than anyone in history. His fastball, even in his 40s, routinely touched 95+ miles per hour. But it wasn't just the statistics, it was the presence. Nolan Ryan carried himself with a quiet, steely resolve that communicated an absolute refusal to be disrespected. The most iconic example, in 1993, at 46 years old, he plunked Robin Ventura. Ventura charged the mound. Ryan, without hesitation, grabbed the much younger player in a headlock and delivered several punches. That moment cemented his legend. Here was a man who, despite his age, would not be pushed around. He was the embodiment of a warrior who simply refused to be intimidated by youth or aggression. But if you want to know the exact moment Nolan Ryan became a god in the eyes of baseball fans, look at 1990. He was 43 years old. Bo Jackson, the most explosive athlete of the era, hit a line drive directly into Ryan's face. It split his lip and blood began gushing down his jersey. Most men would be on a stretcher. Ryan, he wiped the blood on his pants, stayed in the game, and struck out the next batters to finish 7 innings. He went to the hospital after the game for 7 stitches. Ryan's toughness was almost mythological. That is a level of intimidation that has nothing to do with throwing at people. It's the intimidation of a man who simply refuses to feel pain. When you're a batter and you see a guy bleeding from his face, still throwing 98 miles per hour, you don't just fear his arm, you fear his spirit. Ryan also had a psychological trap that was terrifyingly calculated. If he got a batter to a 0-2 count where he had total control, he would often throw the next pitch inches from the batter's nose. He knew he could afford a ball, but he wanted that batter to spend the rest of the game thinking about their own mortality. It was his way of saying, I have you in my pocket and I can take you out whenever I want. It wasn't just a strikeout, it was a humiliation. Batters knew that with Ryan, the inside pitch wasn't a warning, it was an expectation. When Ryan hit the facade of the stadium with a warm-up pitch, he did it on purpose. He wanted the batter to hear the sound of the ball hitting concrete at 100 miles per hour. He wanted them to think, if that hits my ribs, my season is over. He wasn't trying to make friends, he was there to win. And to do so, he would use every ounce of his legendary power and his unflappable will. He transcended the game. He became a force of nature. The era of the truly intimidating pitcher in its most aggressive form may be largely behind us due to rule changes and cultural shifts in baseball. Today's game is safer, more analytical, more professional. We have the pitch clock, we have strict rules against retaliation, but something has been lost in the process. These intimidators represented a time when the baseball diamond was a stage for the rawest human emotions: pride, fear, and unyielding grit. They weren't just playing for the win, they were playing for the territory. They remind us of a time when the psychological battle was as important as the physical one. What these men taught us is that intimidation isn't always about malice. Sometimes it's about overwhelming talent, sometimes it's about protecting your own, and sometimes it's about a sheer force of personality that simply refuses to back down. For a generation of fans, these intimidating figures weren't just players. They were larger-than-life characters who made the game more dramatic, more intense, and undeniably more unforgettable. They tapped into a primal fear, turning a game of skill into a test of courage. And at the center of it all stood Nolan Ryan, a man who pitched through blood and never, ever blinked. Because in the end, the most intimidating thing in the world isn't a 100-mile-per-hour fastball. It's the man who isn't afraid of anything. So, who stands out in your memory? Was it the raw power of the big unit or the psychological warfare of the mad Hungarian? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this journey into the psychology of fear on the diamond, make sure to like and subscribe for more deep dives into the history and hidden stories of sport.